So let's talk a little bit more about Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah, and all the supporters of the Islamic armies. Now, I've seen a lot of people on YouTube and in the news media, and they're saying that, if you don't do this, you're not a Christian. If you don't do that, you're not a liberal, blah, blah, blah. And then I see the right wing talking about if you don't support this and this, then, you're not a conservative, you're not this, you're not that. So let's look at this from an honest perspective. So everybody that watches this channel knows that I don't condone either side killing all the people they're killing. But let's look at the future and what all this really means. So when I'm looking at all these people protesting the bombing in Gaza, all of those people protesting, what they do is they only disapprove of the bombing in Gaza. They don't disapprove using the exact same methodology and tactics against Israel, against other countries. They haven't in the past, and they won't in the future. So let's think about this. When the U.S. conducts a war, do we destroy cities? Now, when Hamas fights a war, do they destroy cities? And the answer to that is yes. And when you look at the weaponry that Hamas uses, they use rocket-propelled artillery. So when we look at their rockets, it's a big myth that they're digging up water pipe and using it to make rockets. What they're actually doing is buying shiploads of water pipe, importing it as construction material, and then building missiles out of it. So when you feel sorry for them and you look at what they're doing, they're using 6-inch water pipe to make a rocket. So what that translates to is a 6-inch rocket is equivalent to a 155 millimeter rocket. So the warhead on that can be anywhere from 1 foot long to 3 foot long, and is much more destructive than an artillery shell. It's basically, if you build it properly, you can have 2.5 artillery shells worth of warhead on a rocket. So when we use a 4-inch water pipe, that's a 100 millimeter rocket, or a 105. And then when we get into the bigger stuff, if you use a 8-inch water pipe, then that gets you into a 203 millimeter rocket. So you can start to see the equivalent between what normal armies use and the destructive capacity of these improvised rockets. So when we're thinking about this, the accuracy of rocket artillery is not very good. So when you use rocket artillery, you use mass bombardment against city-sized targets. So when you drop a rocket barrage on a city, you're hitting hospitals, you're hitting schools, you're hitting homes, you're hitting military targets, you're hitting transportation targets, you're hitting news media crews, you're hitting everything. So when it's done by an aircraft in Gaza, they seem to have a problem with it. But for instance, if Hezbollah fires 100,000 rockets at different cities in Israel, they're going to be hitting hospitals, libraries, historic sites, mosques, churches, synagogues, universities, refugee camps, and on it goes. So when we look at the Geneva Convention that everybody talks about, that was modified in the 60s. So when we go back to World War II, it was normal for an Air Force to carpet bomb a city and just tear everything up in it. So as this war deepens, we're probably going to go back to the same situation we had in World War II, because the forces that hate the United States, they don't have a problem using mass bombardment carpet bombing on U.S. cities or cities anywhere else in the world. So look around at the people that are complaining. Look around at the people that are trying to act like they're good in pursuing peace, and you'll see they actually support the same actions they're condemning when the shoe's on the other foot. Now, one thing nobody considers is this is going to be a massive war if things continue. So if it's not today, it might be next year, 10 years, but this war is going to happen sooner or later. And when we look at this, if it's a conventional war, if most of the U.S. Navy is in the Mediterranean and it gets blown to pieces and damaged, it could actually force a withdrawal from Europe. So think about that. If you lose the war in the Middle East, basically you've lost the war in the Mediterranean Sea, so Southern Europe cannot be secured anymore. And when you look at Turkey falling out of NATO to support the Islamic Forces, as well as a lot of NATO countries deciding to set this war out, all of a sudden our only ally in Europe may actually be England. And when you think about it, if the U.S. Navy loses most of its ships in the Mediterranean Sea and the coastal areas of Europe, then we will not be able to ship supplies and materials across the ocean, because the submarine warfare that the Russians can put up will prevent us from moving mass amounts of equipment and people across the sea. Because in the early days of World War II, resupplying U.S. isolated forces was a real problem. And the Japanese had the same problem at the end of World War II. And what it turned out is whatever a submarine could haul to you is what you got. Otherwise, you had to improvise, adapt, and overcome. You had to grow your own food. So think about this when you're listening to the talking heads. So see you on the next video.